Charleston, South Carolina, 1852. The study door stood ajar, candlelight flickering through. Dinah gripped the silver tray, frozen. She'd just heard Colonel Augustus Whitmore confess something no white man in the antebellum South would ever admit. And the terrifying part wasn't what he said, but to whom. Jacob, the slave everyone at Oakwood Plantation considered just another field hand, was inside. What Dinah heard that night would shatter the balance of power in that house forever. The secret wasn't crime, debt, or common adultery. It was something that, if revealed, would destroy not only the colonel, but the entire aristocratic structure his family had built for generations. And Dinah, a 46-year-old house slave who'd learned invisibility to survive, now held everyone's fate in her hands. From that moment on, she wouldn't just be a servant who cleaned, cooked, and obeyed. She'd become keeper of a secret that made her the most powerful person in that house, without anyone suspecting. Before we continue, subscribe and comment what country you're watching from. What you're about to hear, the history books tried to bury. Charleston, March 1838. The air inside Oakwood Plantation's big house was thick as molasses, burning tobacco mixed with magnolia blossoms, creating an atmosphere that clung to skin and throat. Brick walls trapped daytime heat and released cold dampness at night. This was Dinah's world for 30 years. Purchased at 12 in Charleston's slave market, she'd been trained to serve the Whitmore family directly. She'd learned to walk without sound, speak only when spoken to, read expressions before words came. Her invisibility was her survival. Colonel Augustus Whitmore, 57, represented everything South Carolina aristocracy considered respectable. Military honors from 1812, productive cotton lands, marriage to Virginia-born Catherine, and an immaculate reputation built on generations of silent exploitation. Mrs. Catherine Whitmore, 43, had learned early that marriage meant preserving property and lineage, not love. Cold, calculating, deeply religious, she ruled the household with an iron fist in silk gloves. She had 3 adult children in arranged marriages, spending days between prayer circles, embroidery, and strict supervision of house slaves. Dinah knew every sigh, every tense silence between the couple, every disapproving glance Catherine cast when Augustus lingered too long in his study, but she didn't understand what lay behind that distance until Jacob arrived. April 1838. The colonel returned from Richmond with a special acquisition. Jacob was 19, tall, broad-shouldered from cotton fieldwork, with delicate features contrasting his body's strength, calloused hands, but long, elegant fingers, dark, deep eyes, carrying an intelligence that unsettled anyone who looked too long. "He'll be useful for detail work," the colonel announced. "Learns quickly, knows his numbers." Catherine arched an eyebrow. "Numbers? Be careful not to put ideas in these people's heads." Augustus ignored her, determining Jacob would work directly under his supervision. Plantation administration, inventory control, commercial correspondence. Dinah noticed immediately. The colonel treated Jacob differently. No shouting, no threats. When speaking to him, an almost imperceptible hesitation, as if choosing words carefully. And Jacob responded with serenity that seemed to defy that brutal hierarchy's unwritten rules. In following months, Jacob occupied a small room in the big house's back, separated from slave quarters, officially to facilitate nighttime document work. But everyone knew this wasn't normal. Dinah, who swept hallways, changed linens, served dinner, began perceiving a pattern. Every night around 10, the colonel locked himself in his study. Half an hour later, Jacob discreetly entered through the side door. Both remained until late hours, candlelight burning through the door's crack. At first, Dinah thought it just work. Then she suspected something more sordid, whispered rumors about masters abusing young slaves. But this was different. No muffled screams, no crying, no silent violence she'd recognize. Just low voices, contained laughter, pages turning. Until one December 1840 night, Dinah decided, without knowing why, to stay and listen. The hallway was dark when Dinah positioned herself beside the study door, pretending to arrange a flower vase. Her heart pounded. If discovered, she'd be punished. But something greater than fear drove her. The need to understand this house she knew like her hands back, but which suddenly seemed to hold unseen layers. "Read this passage again," the colonel's voice, impossibly gentle. "I want to hear your interpretation." Jacob's voice responded, clear and measured, with diction that didn't seem from someone raised in cotton fields. "Plato argues that the highest love transcends the body. He sees in two masculine souls' union the purest affection, because it isn't contaminated by procreation's need or nature-imposed roles. Silence. Then Augustus, even lower. And you believe that? That love can exist outside what church and society tell us is correct? Sir, Jacob hesitated. I believe love exists wherever it finds space, and that we try suffocating it with rules because we fear it. Dinah felt a shiver down her spine. This wasn't master and slave. It was dialogue between equals, or at least two men pretending to be within those four walls. You surprise me every day, Augustus said. In another world, another life, you'd be a professor, a philosopher, not a slave, Jacob completed without bitterness, just stating fact. I didn't want it this way, but it is, and there's nothing you can do except free me, and if you free me, if I free you, you'll leave, and I'll stay here in this empty house, this empty marriage, this life I never chose. Dinah covered her mouth. For the first time she understood. Not lust, not abuse. Something far more dangerous, more forbidden, more condemnable. It was love. In following nights, Dinah returned to listen. With each conversation, more revealed itself. The colonel spoke of his youth in England, studying law at Oxford, of a classmate named Thomas, with whom he discussed poetry and philosophy, of a stolen kiss in an empty library, promises made by candlelight, and how, returning to South Carolina for family responsibilities, he'd been forced to marry Catherine, forget Thomas, bury that part of himself, like burying a body. You remind me of him, he confessed one night, not physically, but in how you see the world, as if seeing beyond appearances. And you remind me, Jacob responded, that not all masters are merely masters. Some are prisoners disguised as kings. Those words echoed in Dinah's mind. She, who'd always seen the colonel as untouchable power, now saw him as a broken man, and Jacob, whom she'd imagined just another victim, revealed someone with subtle, almost invisible power, the power to be heard, seen, loved by someone who should only command. But what frightened Dinah most wasn't the forbidden love itself. It was realizing that, for the first time, she possessed knowledge worth more than gold. A secret capable of destroying lives, ruining reputations, altering destinies. While she cleaned floors, served coffee, pretended invisibility, Dinah began understanding something fundamental. Whoever listens also governs. Until one July 1845 night, everything changed. Dinah was again in the hallway when she heard the colonel's voice, trembling like never before. I can't pretend anymore, Jacob. When I'm with Catherine, when I pretend sleeping beside her, when I smile at social gatherings, I feel like I'm dying inside. You're the only real thing in my life. Sir, Jacob's voice was gentle but firm. What you're asking is impossible. We cannot be what we're not permitted to be. Then we'll flee, sell everything, go to Europe where nobody knows us. And your family, your children, your position. They mean nothing if I cannot be who I am. Long silence. Then footsteps approaching the door. Dinah barely had time hiding behind a column when the door opened. Jacob emerged, face wet with tears he quickly wiped. He passed without seeing her, disappearing into dark corridor. Inside the study, the colonel remained seated, head in hands, sobbing quietly. It was then Dinah realized the secret was no longer just information. It was a ticking bomb, and someone sooner or later would make it explode. She didn't know yet that person would be herself. If you value stories like this being told, support the channel. Can't contribute? Share. There are people who desperately need to know they always existed, that they're not the first, that they have ancestors who loved and resisted before them. Charleston, September 1847. Mrs. Catherine Whitmore wasn't a woman who ignored signs. 30 years of marriage taught her to read between lines, notice subtle changes, suspect everything outside routine, and for months, something deeply troubled her. Augustus was different, more distant, more absent, yet paradoxically lighter, as if carrying a secret that fed him. He spent hours locked in his study, neglected social dinners, avoided the conjugal bedroom with increasingly fragile excuses. And there was that slave, Jacob, the name she'd heard her husband murmur during sleep. One stifling September afternoon, Catherine summoned Dinah to her room. You've been my house slave how many years, Dinah? 33, ma'am. And in these 33 years, always loyal to this house, haven't you? Always, ma'am. Catherine studied her with blade-sharp eyes. Then tell me, What does my husband do every night locked in that study with the slave Jacob? Dinah felt blood freeze. This was the question she'd feared for years. The crossroads she'd always known would come. They work on account books, ma'am. Commercial correspondence. Until early morning hours? Catherine approached. Do you think me a fool, Dinah? Think I don't notice when there are secrets in this house? Dinah lowered her eyes. I don't know what you're talking about, ma'am. Don't you? Catherine's voice rose. Or won't you tell me? The silence that followed was dense, dangerous. Dinah knew any word could be condemnation. For herself, for the Colonel, for Jacob. If something wrong is happening under my roof, Catherine continued, and you're hiding it from me, you'll be punished. But if you tell me the truth, I guarantee your protection. Choose wisely. Dinah took a deep breath, and in that moment made the decision that would change everything. Ma'am, she said with firm voice, there are things masters do that aren't for slaves to judge or reveal. If you want to know what happens in that study, I suggest you go there and see with your own eyes. It was clever, confirmed nothing, but planted suspicion's seed. Catherine dismissed her with a brusque gesture, but Dinah knew the seed would germinate, and it germinated faster than anyone expected. 3 nights later, Catherine waited until everyone slept. She descended stairs in silence, barefoot, wrapped in a silk robe. Dinah, unable to sleep, saw her from the pantry window and knew immediately what was about to happen. The mistress walked to the study. The door was closed but not locked. She opened it slowly, soundlessly. The scene she found would forever destroy the illusion she maintained about her marriage. Augustus and Jacob sat side by side at the table, leaning over a book. They weren't doing anything explicitly compromising. No kissing, no lascivious touching. But the intimacy was undeniable. Jacob's head nearly touched the Colonel's shoulder. Their hands brushed turning pages. And the way Augustus looked at him, with tenderness, with adoration, with a love Catherine had never seen directed at her in 3 decades of matrimony, said everything. Augustus. Her voice cut the air like a razor. Both men separated abruptly. Jacob stood, lowering his head. The Colonel went pale. Catherine, don't. She raised her hand. Don't dare insult me with explanations. She looked at Jacob with pure hatred that made him instinctively recoil. Leave. Now. And don't return to this house. Jacob looked at Augustus, who nodded almost imperceptibly. He left in silence, closing the door behind him. When they were alone, Catherine locked the door. 30 years, she said, voice trembling with contained fury. 30 years I pretended not to see, pretended believing you were just cold, distant, devoted to business. But this, she pointed to the chair where Jacob had sat, this is an abomination. Catherine, don't interrupt me, she shouted. You made me a fool, made this house a farce, and for what? For a slave? A man you bought like buying cattle? It's not what you think. It's not? Then explain, Augustus. Explain how a man of your position, with your name, can lower himself to, I love him. The words came out low but firm. I love Jacob, and I can't pretend anymore that I don't. The silence that followed was terrifying. Catherine took 2 steps back, as if punched. You're insane, completely insane. Perhaps, Augustus responded, and for the first time in years seemed free. But it's the truth, and you always knew, Catherine, always knew there was no love between us, that this marriage was a convenient lie. A lie that built this family, that gave name to our children, that sustained everything you are, and killed me inside every day. Catherine breathed with difficulty, hands trembling. If this leaks, we'll be destroyed. Our children will be dishonored. The entire family dragged through mud. I know. Then you choose. Choose now. Either rid yourself of that slave and never speak of him again, or I myself will tell everyone, the bishop, our business partners, all of society, what I discovered here today. Augustus looked her in the eyes. If you do that, you'll destroy yourself too. I'd rather be destroyed than live with this farce. From that night on, nothing was silent anymore. The Colonel locked himself in his room. Jacob was sent back to slave quarters, and Catherine began plotting how to resolve that problem without destroying the family, a way that would involve Dinah in ways she'd never imagine, because Catherine didn't know yet, but the chambermaid who'd heard everything behind doors for years would now be summoned to testify, and what Dinah decided to do with her knowledge would determine who survived that storm and who'd be swallowed by it. The confrontation between the Colonel and Mrs. Catherine shook Oakwood's foundations in ways only Dinah could fully perceive. In following days, tension was palpable. Augustus avoided his wife. Catherine stopped appearing at meals, and Jacob, banished from the study and returned to field work in the cotton fields, carried in his shoulders a sadness that made even other slaves respectfully distance themselves. One October 1847 morning, Catherine summoned Dinah again. This time, no veiled threats, just a cold, calculated proposal. "Dinah," she said, seated in her velvet chair, hands crossed on her lap, "you've served me for decades, know every corner of this house, every secret, every movement, and I know you're loyal, not to me, perhaps, but to your own survival." Dinah remained silent, waiting. "I need you to testify," Catherine continued. "I need you, if necessary, to confirm before Reverend Thompson and before this city's important men that you saw my husband acting inappropriately with a slave." Dinah's heart raced. "Ma'am, it doesn't need to be a complete lie, just a selected truth. You saw him locked with Jacob, didn't you? Saw how he treated that slave differently? That's sufficient. And if I refuse," Catherine smiled coldly, "you won't refuse, because if you refuse, I'll be forced to conclude you're an accomplice, and accomplices are punished." Dinah lowered her eyes. She knew she was being forced to choose a side, and for the first time in her life realized she had a real choice. She wasn't just a piece in others' game. She could decide how the game would end. "I'll give my testimony," she said finally, "but with one condition." Catherine arched her eyebrows, surprised. "Condition? You're not in position to make demands." "I am, ma'am." Dinah raised her gaze, and for the first time in 33 years, there was no submission in it. There was something new, power. "Because I know things you don't know, things I heard, things that if revealed the wrong way would destroy not just the colonel, but you too." Catherine's face paled. "You dare threaten me?" "I don't threaten, ma'am. I just make clear that my silence has value, and if you want me to testify in your favor, there's a price." Catherine pressed her lips. "What price?" "My manumission, and my son's, who works in the cotton gin." For a long moment both women stared at each other. Mistress and slave, oppressor and oppressed, but in that instant the lines were blurred. "You have courage," Catherine said finally. "I grant it, but only after all this is over, after I have what I need." "No, ma'am. Now. The papers signed with notary seal, or there's no testimony." Catherine trembled with rage but knew she had no choice. "Very well. But if you betray me—" "I won't betray. I'll just tell the truth you want to hear." And so it was done. A week later, Dinah held in her hands her manumission letter and her son Samuel's, age 20. They were fragile documents, just pieces of paper, but represented something she'd never imagined possessing. Freedom. But freedom came with a cost. Catherine convened a meeting with Reverend Thompson, the family lawyer, and 2 influential Charleston merchants. She said she needed to resolve a delicate matter of moral order, threatening the family's reputation. Dinah was called to testify. When she entered the room, she saw the colonel seated in a chair, pale, defeated. He looked at her, and in that look was a silent plea. But Dinah had already made her choice. "Dinah," said Reverend Thompson, a 60-year-old man with severe air, "Mrs. Catherine informed us that you can confirm certain irregularities in the colonel's behavior. Is this true?" Dinah took a deep breath. "Yes, Reverend, I can confirm." The colonel closed his eyes, as if expecting the final blow. "I confirm," Dinah continued, "that Colonel Augustus Whitmore spent many nights working with the slave Jacob. I confirm that he treated him with unusual respect for a master. I confirm that I saw between them a closeness that went beyond expected." "Closeness?" the Reverend pressed. "What kind of closeness?" "Reverend," Dinah chose words carefully, "I saw a man tormented by loneliness, who found in another human being, even if a slave, intellectual companionship. I saw conversations about books, about philosophy. I saw mutual respect. I saw," she hesitated, "affection. But I never saw anything that directly offended God." Catherine stood abruptly. "Dinah, you promised me." "I promised to tell the truth, ma'am, and this is the truth. What the colonel feels may be sin in the church's eyes, but what he did, teaching a slave to read, treating him with humanity, isn't crime. It's just sadness." The Reverend frowned. "You're saying there were no carnal acts?" "I cannot confirm what I never saw, Reverend." The room fell silent. Catherine was furious but trapped. She couldn't contradict Dinah without revealing she'd expected more compromising testimony, which would raise suspicions about her own motivations. The family lawyer, a pragmatic man, spoke. "Reverend Thompson, I believe this is a matter of conscience between the colonel and God. I see no basis for legal or ecclesiastical action. The Reverend reluctantly agreed. Let the Colonel seek confession and penance, but I agree. Without concrete evidence of carnal sin, we cannot act. Catherine knew she'd lost. Dinah had testified enough to validate her suspicions, but not enough to completely destroy Augustus. It was perfect balance, out and entirely intentional. When everyone left, the Colonel approached Dinah in the hallway. "Why did you help me?" he asked, voice choked. "I didn't help you, Colonel. I helped myself. And Jacob, who doesn't deserve to be destroyed for loving. Catherine will never forgive this. I know, but now I'm free, and she can't touch me anymore." Augustus nodded slowly, with deep sadness in his eyes. "What will you do now?" "Live," Dinah responded. "Something I could never do before." She turned to leave, but before, looked back. "And you, Colonel, what will you do?" Augustus looked through the window, toward the cotton fields where Jacob worked. "I don't know, but for the first time I know what I won't do. I won't pretend anymore." Dinah left Oakwood a week later, taking with her her son Samuel and the manumission documents she'd secured through her strategic silence. She established herself in Charleston, where she opened a small boarding house serving travelers and freed people. She never again spoke about what she'd seen or heard in that mansion, but the impact of her choice echoed for years. Colonel Augustus Whitmore discreetly sold the plantation 2 years later and moved to New Orleans, taking with him only a few belongings and one trusted slave, Jacob. There, in a big city where nobody knew them, they lived together until Augustus's death in 1865 at 70. In his will, he left Jacob officially manumitted with a small inheritance that allowed him to live with dignity until his day's end. Catherine remained in Charleston, bitter and lonely, sustained by income from lands her children administered. She never again mentioned her husband's name. She died in 1858, without having made peace with the past. And Dinah? She lived to 82, respected in her community as a woman of firm word and just heart. She never told the complete story of what happened at Oakwood, but her grandchildren always remembered a phrase she repeated: "There's power in silence." But there's even greater power in knowing exactly when to break that silence. Decades later, when historians began studying Charleston's imperial manumission records, they found a curious notation in 1847 archives. Dinah, house slave, and her son Samuel, manumitted for services rendered to the Whitmore family. Nature of services, confidential. Nobody could explain exactly what those services were, but those who understood the era's codes knew. Dinah wasn't freed from kindness. She was freed because she held the only power masters truly feared, the power of truth, and she used that power not to destroy, but to liberate. Herself, the Colonel, and Jacob. 3 people trapped in different cages, who found in the chambermaid, listening behind doors, the key to open them. Oakwood Plantation was demolished in 1920 to make way for a textile mill. But Dinah's story survived, passed from generation to generation, as a reminder: whoever listens also governs. And whoever governs with wisdom liberates. And you? Do you believe Dinah made the right choice? Would you have had the courage to use the power that silence gives? Or would you have revealed everything? Leave your opinion in the comments. If this story made you think about power, silence, and freedom, subscribe to the channel and share this video. Because stories like this show that resistance isn't always a shout. Sometimes it's knowing exactly what to say and what to keep silent.